Hello and welcome to Language Matters. Language Matters discusses and debates on various aspects and components of language education, particularly English as a second language and foreign language in the Indian context. Here we discuss and debate various issues, as I said, on language education. Today we have a discussion on listening, and we have Dr. Hema Ramanathan. Hema Ramanathan has been a teacher and she taught in University of West Georgia, and presently she is freelancing, consulting on education, particularly English as a second language in Indian context. Hema, welcome to this discussion. Let me ask you through a question. The first and foremost, what is listening? Why listening is important in learning a foreign language, second language?
I'm not going to talk a lot about how we learn a language as children.
Fine.
Because grades, by the time we are 0 to 5 years, schools don't have much to do with language learning, and that's where the mother tongue or the first language is learned. But if we talk about how we learn a second language, whether it is English or Hindi or any other language that comes after the mother tongue, we learn a language, we learn the language by listening for the most part. When I say listening, listening is composed of sounds. We listen to the sounds, and we listen to the sounds that are brought together to create a word, a phrase, and a sentence. So we do listen to particular sounds, but more important, we listen to what the meaning of what the person is that is saying. It's not, is this a noun, is it a verb? We listen to what is a person trying to say, what is a meaning rather than the form of the utterance.
Fine, fine.
And that's a communication that we really work with on listening. The other really good point that I think we need to talk about listening is when we listen, we're very active. So even in a lecture, when you have a lecturer sitting there and talking to 150 students or 60 students, a real listener is not just sitting there letting it wash over them. A listener is engaged in what the person is saying. A listener is saying, so what exactly are you telling me? And where is the purpose of that? And where does that come from? And the person who is listening, the listener, is not just using ears, but is using eyes, is listening and understanding what the purpose of that is through the words and through other features of that communication interaction.
Yeah, fine. Let me ask you. You have it really very apt. But what actually happens is listening skill has been designated as passive skill. So actually, you said listening is very active. One has to be active, and it can be also interactive. Means fine. Okay. Now, I am an English language teacher. I have no resources to promote listening in terms of technology. That's what most teachers assume. I need some CD or cassettes or something like that to play it on. So before going into how a teacher can do with less resources, let me ask you the problems and issues relating to listening, teaching of listening in the classroom in the Indian context.
All of us, I think, agree that teaching and learning, whether it's English or math or whatever, is exam driven in India. If it's not examined, if it's not tested, if there's no grade, if there's no mark, if in the 10th and 12th it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't get taught.
So whatever is tested is taught.
Right.
That's actually in a way is not conducive. It's not good for promoting the holistic perspective of any learning.
That's true, but it's even more difficult when you talk in terms of listening, because listening is not tested.
Yeah, in most school systems. Yeah.
We tried it in CBSE. It really doesn't work very well for various reasons, and part of it is how the schools are set up. So the first thing is, if we want listening to be included in the curriculum, include that meaningfully and completely in the examination system in the high school.
So that it gets realized
percolate
in the
down.
It gets realized in the classroom.
Right. The second thing is, when we look at what we mean in terms of curriculum, we still see English as an academic language. It's a language that needs to be learned to do an exam. Now, when we are 6 and 5 and 8, at home we are told, come and do this and tell a poem, sing a song. So English is more entertainment value at the lower grades than it is learning value.
But as the
And therefore, in schools, because schools do not entertain and do not entertain an entertainment value, listening doesn't happen. Second point. The third point, and while you said teachers don't have facilities, it's also the environment in which the school is set. Most schools are set in very busy streets where there's a lot of noise. For the students to listen and for the teacher to make the students listen, you need a certain amount of quiet. Listening, it's very difficult when you have competing inputs like horns or music playing.
And lots of noise from other
Right.
classes, yeah.
Than the teacher's voice. I think the fourth point, and this is something we can do something about, is teachers' own comfort level with the listening skill.
Themselves.
You're right in that teachers have to be the input. Every listening has an input, which is speaking. So the teacher in a classroom is the speaking input, is a speaker. Without the speaker, there cannot be a listener.
Teacher's language serving as input for language processing.
The teacher as a speaker.
Okay.
If the teacher is not comfortable speaking the language, then she's not going to speak it, which means that no listening can happen. So we need to increase the teacher's comfort level in speaking. And how we do that is another discussion in itself.
Okay, itself.
Right.
The strategies the teachers can
Right.
adopt. Now, let me ask you, we want children to develop all the skills that comes, you made it very clear, when the purpose of language teaching is meaning driven, children can acquire the language very well rather than form based. We need to explain to the teachers here and parents as well, do not rely too much on grammar teaching, how a particular sound is produced. What you need to know is, when I say the word pen, people should decode it as pen. So it's the child need not know PEN as 3 sounds or whatever. So you said orality is important because language is basically oral. Now this has something to do with, if I am a good reader, with that skill I can move on to listening or speaking, reading, writing. How this listening and speaking are interconnected, intertwined, how both can mutually support. Yeah.
And I'm picking up on something that you said earlier. Language has connections, very strong connections to phonetics and grammar. Reading does not have a lot of connections with phonetics.
Yeah.
To a large extent, it doesn't. Reading is how it appears on paper. But before we come to that, can we talk a little about where and how we listen?
Fine.
What are the different conditions
fine.
in which we listen? Because that has an impact on the concepts of listening and the concept of reading, and the process of listening and the process of reading. So I'd like to explain that a little.
Yeah.
We talk about 2 spaces in which language is used. The space that we as teachers are most familiar with is the classroom space. It's the academic space. The one that our students are most familiar with is a social space, which is outside of the classroom.
Where English language may not happen much.
No, it doesn't. But language happens.
Yeah,
Sounds happen.
Yes.
Right? Schema happen. And that is where the schema gets built up. Whether it's in Hindi or Telugu or Tamil, whatever it is, whatever they're doing outside, when they see a pen, to them what you call it is not important. What they see it when you call it.
What it means.
What their mental image is of that becomes more important. For many of them, if you talk of a pen, it's not necessarily something where you open it out. It's something where you click. It is something that you write with. It is not something that you draw with, as in calligraphy.
True.
Right? So pens have very different perceptions depending on the generations and the use that we have. When we talk about academic listening, we don't have those schemas. In social listening, we do. Let me explain that first. In social listening, when students are out in the playground and they're talking about, and there might be 3 different languages they're talking, none of which is English.
And
right?
they understand all the 3 languages.
Yeah. How do they do that? Whether they say kick the ball in Telugu or Tamil or Hindi, the other person with the ball knows what to do with the ball, because that's what they do in a playground. You have the ball, you're playing soccer, you're playing football, you've got the ball, you've got to kick it. You've got to dribble it, you've got to kick it, you've got to move the ball. You can't touch it with your hand, and they know that.
So, yeah,
right? They don't have to be told, don't touch it with your hand, right? So, the meaning of that is derived from their context and their experience in that context. In an academic setting, we don't give them that experience, we don't give them that context. We give them words. We give them words and say, you need to understand these words, and that is how you need to learn. So, I am sitting here and I am giving a lecture. I am talking without really telling the students. So, I tell them this is going to be in the exam. This is about flowers. So, we are going to talk about stamen and petals and stalk and whatever else. To them, it really doesn't mean anything, because to them, the flowers are what I wear in my hair, what smells nice, what colors it has. When we do academic listening, we don't build all of that in.
It's ideas and ideas.
Right. It is concepts. It is what you need to know. So, to that extent, we are looking at not bringing in what they know as much as developing what they don't know. So, academic listening is always built on a deficit model.
Okay. That means I need to know something.
Right.
Maybe connecting with my previous experience.
Maybe.
Something slightly.
But it's always moving forward. It's not describing where I am. In a social context, it is what am I doing now, and what language do I need to do what I need to do now, and what do I need to listen to do what I need to do now. Whereas in academic listening, it is always, well, I'm listening now, but I'm listening because I need to write an exam 2 months later, because I need to finish my homework today.
And maybe the ideas which I do not know so far.
Right.
Fine.
The linguistic features in academic language, therefore, become clarity, right?
Coherence.
Coherence. It becomes a formal language. Whereas in a social setting, it is not formal. It is words, single sounds, utterances.
Exactly.
So, I may say kick. I don't have to say kick the ball. I have the ball. When I say kick, the person knows. Don't just kick your leg, kick the ball. And don't kick my face, kick the ball. You don't have to say 3 words. That one word is sufficient, because the context provides the other 2 words.
But in academic setting, it's completely different.
Right.
So, they have to really very conscientiously listen to that matters. Yeah, fine.
The follow through on academic is also very different, because when in a social setting, there is always an interaction. You say something, I do something, or I say something back to you. It depends on what I've said and what you have said. So, there's an interactional pattern that happens. If you're silent, then either I can remain silent and say, hey, I don't have to say, are you listening to me?
So, there are some speech acts,
right.
Pragmatic works. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
In social, the suprasegmental and the body language and the interactional patterns that come from the setting supply a lot of what listening need to happen.
Whereas in
an academic setting, it is verbal.
Completely.
Right. Almost entirely. The interaction even is expected to be verbal. I mean, we do activities in the classroom. So, when we ask a question, we don't ask, so what? We say, so what do you think? Tell me in one word what you think.
Yeah, even if you
right?
want.
Right. Even if you're asking a question, it's a complete sentence. When you want the students to answer, you want them to answer in a complete sentence. If you don't listen to a complete sentence, you say, not right, cannot do that. So, we don't accept what a listening pattern is.
There's a mechanism of listening, technology of listening.
We say you need to take notes. but the notes need to be complete. We look at the PowerPoints that we produce. PowerPoints are supposed to be notes, which means they are reminders of what we need to know about. But most of our PowerPoints are complete sentences. They're paragraphs, each slide. It goes against the purpose of what a PowerPoint is supposed to do, which is to help you lead you through something. That is where the listening really should come in, and it doesn't.
So, academic listening demands much more concentration and a kind of understanding the mechanics of listening itself, rather than in social settings. Actually, you are into it and you know what you are speaking or what you are listening, whereas here the ideas which come from the speaker or somewhere may be new. So you need to be much more serious about your listening.
And because we don't use all the other attendant support systems that we could use as speakers to help the listener, listening in an academic setting becomes very difficult.
Okay.
We make it difficult.
Okay. So now
let's move to reading.
Reading and listening. Then we will discuss a bit about the two approaches to listening. Yeah.
Right.
Please.
So if we look at reading and listening, there are many similarities. They're both called receptive skills, whereas speaking and writing are called productive skills, because we produce something at the end of the speaking or the writing, whether it's a written piece or a speech. Whereas in reading, we're supposed to take it in. Listening, we are taking in what somebody has said. So they are receptive skills. We receive. Receive is so passive. It's as though we just receive and then it just goes away. No, as I said earlier, listeners are very active people, and listening is an active process. So now to call listening and reading as passive skills seem misnomers, and I think we need to change that first of all. That whole categorization needs to change.
Yeah, this
right.
has been,
but a lot of teachers and a lot of theorists still talk about it in those terms. So we need to move beyond that. Both of them require large vocabularies. In listening, we may not receive the entire sentence in the process of listening, and we may receive only pieces of that sentence, but we still need a large vocabulary to understand what in that setting does it mean. The third thing is, in reading especially, we need to have a very good knowledge of grammar. Grammatical structures, the process of grammar, and the way the grammar is laid out in English language is very different from any Indian language, and we know that. Listening does help, but it doesn't require as much of an underpinning of grammar as reading does. Because a lot, like we said earlier, there are lots of support.
I have a problem with what you have said now. When I read a statement, a paragraph, I decode the meaning, I decode the structure, and then coming to derive the meaning or infer it. And don't you think that I do think that I require the same in listening? Not necessarily. Why?
See, I didn't even have to say anything. I just said okay. Which isn't even a word.
I got that.
Right. Okay. Where is the grammar in
Fine. And it's kind of speech act.
Right.
Okay. Fine.
So a lot of our speeches, a lot of our listening is decoding a speech act.
Okay.
A lot of our speech acts are not grammar based.
Fine. It's kind of pragmatics, your gesture, your behavior.
Right.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Let teachers and our students understand that. Okay. It's not that when you listen things, you listen to the speaker, listen to the lecture given, and derive the meaning from there. Not only just verbal things, other things. Fine.
And it's not just the body language. I mean, I emphasize a lot with my hands when I talk, and I think a lot of Indian teachers do that. We use our hands, which is why holding a textbook for English teachers is very difficult.
Okay, the hands are used. Yeah.
But we also need to remember that we use our voices, and it's not just for volume, it is also for intonation, for stress. When I say I am not, when I say I'm not is very different. It's
Well-
received very differently. As a listener, the first one, you know that I'm hesitant. The second one, you know I'm very clear, almost dictatorial about that. And it doesn't come from the words. It comes from the stress, it comes from the intonation, it comes from the pitch. It's all the suprasegmental features of my speech act that tell you that.
True, true, true.
But how do we know? For instance, one of the let me tell you a story.
Yeah, please, please go
Okay.
ahead.
This is when I was first teaching in the US. This is my first semester. It was October. It was getting cool. I'm from Chennai. It was hot. And I go to the school place and I'm wearing 3 layers when I go into the classroom. And we're doing an activity and they're all seated in a semicircle. It's getting a little warm in the room, so I take my sweater off and I put it down in the corner. Then I say, okay, have all of you understood the instructions? Right, let's peel off from the left. And I had this sudden shocked silence. I said, so would you begin? Oh, okay. And then they began and they did the activity. So at break time, I said, what was the problem? And they said, well, you said peel off and you took your sweater off.
Then,
Right? So they were looking at my words. It's only when I said, will you begin?
So
To them, it was not begin peeling. Then the speech act came in, the idea that we were going to do an activity set in. The larger setting of the activity was brought in by my saying, would you begin? And pointed to someone on my left, than the peeling, which was the immediate act before.
oh, great. So when you speak, when people listen to someone, a teacher or anyone, it involves much more things. And it also tells that language is more social when it comes to listening and speaking.
You cannot listen in a vacuum.
True, true.
And this is you cannot listen unless there is a speech act. So the in reading, there isn't another input of a skill that is required for reading. The input is the written text.
And your grammatical understanding of.
Yeah, but there is a text. In listening, you need another skill input, which is speaking.
True.
Whether it's a person, whether you're listening to a radio, whether you're listening to a CD, it comes from another person. So it is interactional. You cannot have listening without speaking.
Yeah, true, fine.
Without a speech act, there's no listening act.
You have really brought out the thing that how you can understand listening. Okay, now let me ask you, there are many ways listening as an activity is understood for teaching. When we teach, we say that bottom up and top down. Can you throw some light on that?
I'm not sure it really matters to teachers what bottom up and top down is, except that it makes a difference in what we expect of our students as listeners.
And it also helps to some extent, I believe, in designing the activities.
No, and it's also understanding what we use listening for.
Yes, yeah.
The top down really goes, and we think of it as an inverted V, as a V, sorry, an inverted pyramid.
Yes.
It goes from the meaning, from the larger concept of meaning to single sounds.
That's a top down model.
Right, that's a top. So at the top is a meaning, and that is the most important thing in listening. The bottom up goes from language to meaning. So we begin with discrete sounds. We begin with phonetic sounds. What is the difference between sir and sher? What is the difference between bur and bher? What is the difference between bur and per, ter and thir? So we begin with those discrete sounds. We build those phonemes into a word, which goes into a class, which goes into a sentence.
As a teacher, what would you suggest teachers to practice or understand? I know when you say both, as a teacher I must know both the strategies, both the ways how listening can happen, and I also should know it, because to understand what is listening and how listening can be done in the classroom. But what would you suggest? You said I understand meaning is important. When I say how are you, I am asking you something, to respond to. But why should I know, following your bottom up approach, how involves three letters and two sounds, whatever the sound, then it's a structure. So let me go from meaning. I would suggest, but why still teacher should know it? I mean the bottom up approach also. Yeah.
I think we've established that the top down is really where listening happens. Whether language learning should happen there is a different matter. That's a larger concept. But if we are talking of listening, which is basic to language learning, we need to have a top down approach.
Fine.
Let me explain why we don't have that, and then we'll talk about what the bottom up approach requires. As I said, it's because teachers don't really listen to their students.
Yeah.
They want only what they want. It's like you've not written what I said, and therefore you don't get marks. You didn't repeat what I said, you weren't listening to me. No, I understood what you were saying, and I'm telling you in words that I know.
I'm putting it in a different manner.
Right. And I may respond non-verbally. That is also a response. That's also showing my listening capacity.
True.
Right? So teachers need to understand that listening is not just a matter of repeating. It's not verbalizing what the speech act has said.
And replication of something.
Right. Reproduction, replication are not necessarily marks of a good, successful listener or a careful listener.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay?
Recently, what happened was the question asked to the class 3 child was, "What is the name of your English teacher?" The child wrote, "Mrs. so and so is my English teacher," but the teacher wanted an answer. Name of my English teacher is Miss. So that's a problem of child. Wanted to write different. Means understood differently. The teacher wanted. I wanted this answer because I wanted this construction. Right. So there's a problem with that.
Right, and that is part of the writing. What we expect, and we transfer that writing expectation to listening and speaking expectation, and say unless you tell me what I want to hear, you're not listening.
True.
Right. So the first thing that teachers have to learn is with the top down, we need to stop having so much control
and
about what
expectation, what I want you
right.
That should come.
Don't control what the student is listening to, because a lot of the listening is not a matter of listening to every word. When we're listening for meaning, we're looking at what we think are important words.
For me, yeah.
Many of the other words are left out. We chunk when we listen.
True.
But and we there are many other chunks that we just say not important. We fill in those gaps as listeners.
That capacity children
right.
have. Everybody has.
Everybody should have, and that's how listening happens, and that's how listening should happen. And that's where schema comes in. A previous experience with a language tells us, oh, if I have a man-dog bit, I know which order it should come in. I don't need to listen to the order. True. Unless it is something in the television, which then I say, oh, the man bit the dog, then that's news.
Yes.
Whereas if it's not on TV and if it's not news, and so it's at the doctor's office, then you're saying, oh, the dog bit the
man.
Right. Makes sense. So we're looking at a setting that fills in a lot of that. With the bottom up approach, what we need to remember is that every sound that we make as speakers, and every sound that students listen to as listeners, is not important for us to understand. Whether it is pilot or filet, it doesn't matter. Whether it's a pen or a fen, it doesn't matter. So long as you say, pick up your pen and write, no one's going to think that you need to go to a marshland and pick that up and write. Right? The setting kind of provides it. There are plenty of people with speech impediments. There are plenty of people who can't hear certain sounds. R, for instance. A lot of people can't hear that.
So, but at the same time, taking clue from what you said, in order to develop accuracy and fluency really meaningfully well, the teacher should have the knowledge of bottom up approach, so that it can be kind of combined with a top down model. The
bottom up approach comes when you're looking at accuracy, not at fluency.
Okay.
language learning is a matter of fluency because it's a matter of communication, right? Fluency is the most important thing.
And
Accuracy comes in when fluency has been established.
Yeah, fine, fine, all right. But at the same time, when someone develops fluency, accuracy comes in later. Yeah.
Later,
Yeah, fine.
much later.
Fine, fine, okay.
Right?
Thank you, Hema, for having spent your time meaningfully well, and we hope that teachers get these ideas on listening. And also how listening activities can be understood by the teacher, which is very important, so that it is delivered in the classroom well. The one important thing you brought out was understand listening involves two people and listening involves speaking also. And then actually it is not that just receiving something and being passive skill, it is not so. Okay, thank you very much, and we thank you for having spent your valuable time with us, and shared your understanding, thinking, and how a listening class can be organized. Thank you very much. We will come back with many more things, much more discussions on language matters. Thank you again.